Welcome to the Stay Spicy podcast, where we dive into ways that you can be your most courageous, authentic, and spicy self. Many of you know Lynette and I from our podcast debut on the Demythifying Brand podcast. On our last season, we talked about the importance of building your brand and how you put it out into the world. We also busted a lot of crazy brand myths. You probably remember us signing off on the podcast as Stay Spicy, and that has been our tagline ever since. And since then, we've launched Stay Spicy as a business venture. We have our podcast, workshops, and an online store, more to come. You can find it all at stayspicy.ca. So we're all in now. Lynette and I are live and calling it the Stay Spicy podcast. And this is our next season.
Woohoo!
It's great to be back. What do you think about all this, Lynette?
Oh my God, it's been such a wild ride. And just to remind people who may not know the origin story of all of this, started about 2 years ago, around December 28th, in my kitchen. We were both drinking Prosecco. And so it was the original Prosecco kitchen party. And you said, I've always wanted to do a podcast. And I was like, let's do it. And here we are, season 2. But you know, when we talked about it, we always wanted it to be more than just a podcast. We wanted it to be about creating change, creating community, changing the way we think and talk about ourselves, the way we talk to ourselves, changing systems, changing the bullshit that we've been told and those narratives we've been told over the years. And so that's why I'm really excited as well about the evolution into Stay Spicy Inc. and Stay Spicy Podcast, because it gives us the opportunity to create more tools, a bigger community, and just have a lot more fun with it. And this season is going to be really fun, I think.
I know, I can't wait. I've been really excited about this because I think rebranding to Stay Spicy is opening us up to a lot of conversations that we've been wanting to have. So we've been wanting to talk about leadership. We've been wanting to talk about entrepreneurship. We started talking about branding, personal branding, what it is, how you find your purpose. So I'm really excited for this season because this season we're going to talk about leadership. And there's nothing controversial about leadership, right, Lynette? And, you know, the world needs more authentic leaders. And I think what we want to do here is bring people together to talk about what leadership means, what it doesn't mean. And just like brand myths, there are leadership myths, and people are talking about leadership in different ways. A few stats for you. I love stats. Everyone knows I love stats. A DDI survey found that 57% of people quit because of their boss. And 37% are contemplating leaving for the same reasons. So, you know, people quit bosses, not jobs. We've been talking about that. And, you know, speaking of quitting, according to a McKinsey report, it's called The Great Breakup, this report, which I think
title for a report.
I agree. It's amazing. A lot of people are walking away and ghosting these relationships. Women at a director level are leaving at a rate faster than they're being promoted. So for every woman who's promoted as a director, 2 women leave.
Yeah, and it's not because women can't hack it or do the work, handle the pressure, or any of that crap.
Yeah.
Because actually what that report also talks about is that women are not only leaving the workforce and opting out, but a lot of those women that are opting out of the traditional workforce are choosing to start their own businesses. And as someone who's done that in the past year, I can tell you that is a lot more work and pressure than any of the other jobs I've ever held. I mean, super rewarding, but it's not about that. You know, I've held senior roles across a whole bunch of different industries: politics, communications, marketing, economic development. And I've had varying roles all the way up to executive and C-suite roles. And I definitely had my share of challenges across all of those industries as a female leader. So I can see why women are breaking up with the traditional workforce roles and their bosses and whatever else they're breaking up with. I've also had a lot of female leaders talk to me recently about their challenges. And so that's part of what we're going to talk about this season, is those challenges from the perspective of the leader and also somebody dealing with a leader. And then also some some tips and tricks and learnings that we've both picked up along the way. And of course, we'll learn from some of our guests as we did last season.
Yeah, and working with a lot of leaders. I also started my own business in 2017. So I've had the opportunity to work with a lot of leaders as a consultant. So to see organizations and help building some of their strategies from the ground up. It's been interesting to see how systems function and how when I'm removed from that system and I'm being allowed to do good work and to provide advice, and I just have this sort of one directional challenge to make a difference, the kind of work that you can actually do when there's not all of these, I guess, systems and policies in your way. So I'm seeing that a lot more in workplaces, and I think we'll dive into that later when we talk about culture, but it's definitely something to keep in mind when people are, leaving the workforce or analyzing their leaders. As a millennial, I thrive in change, right? So I definitely relate to this next stat. It says 63% of millennials believe they aren't fully developed as leaders by their employers and management. Mm-hmm. And 71% of the workforce does not trust their leaders' capability to take their organization to the next level. So as a millennial, I thrive under pressure. I thrive when there's change. I like variety. I like the opportunity to produce something, reach goals, make a difference. And, there's still that stereotype that you need to stick it out in an organization or stick it out and move up to management. Stay where you are, work really hard, keep your head down, and then move up to that. And I just don't think that that's the way the workplace is anymore, particularly in the gig economy or a post-COVID world. For me, I find that I want to move up and leave. So whether that's within the same organization or not, and I don't think that succession planning is something that people are really thinking about right now.
Yeah.
And how to keep young talent. Millennials make up most of the workforce. How do you keep us? How do you keep us interested? How do you keep us from leaving? Mm-hmm. There's a stereotype that people should stay in the same job for years and years, but we see now statistically that that's just not the case. Like, if you're not moving every 2 to 3 years to a new position, even within an organization, you are making less money in the long run. You are not advancing your career as far as it can. So millennials want to see leaders that promote them, that have a plan for them, that invest in them. And unfortunately, in larger organizations, we're not seeing that.
Yep.
So what's going on out there?
So I have a theory. I've been thinking about this a lot. And I'm a year older than you, but I'm still a millennial. I'm an elder millennial.
She's only 1 year older than me, but she's like an older sister to me.
Not that much of an older sister. So we are coming at this from the perspective, I think, of millennials, but I also identify with some Gen X type values and things as well. But I've been seeing all these trends and thinking about the why of it all, right? Yeah. And what can you do about it? And I truly believed when I was in the system and I could make change. And we're going to talk over this season about how you can make change within the system. But here's what I come to is that the system wasn't built by us or for us.
Right.
And when I say us, I don't mean just millennials. I don't mean women. I mean anyone who doesn't fit into the box that was created and that is indicative of the people who did build the systems.
Right.
And they then pick for succession planning the people that, and promote and protect and reward the people that fit those characteristics and priorities. But quite frankly, I think those characteristics and priorities just don't work anymore for this workforce. Mm-hmm. So if we didn't build the system, we don't have power in the system, how do you change the system? And that's exactly the conversation we're going to have this season, which is why I'm so excited and which is why this is going to be, I think, an extra spicy season. Not the least of which is going to be some of the titles of our episodes will be the hallmark of that. So stay tuned as we roll out the next few episodes. But what can our listeners expect in terms of topics this season, Sheri?
So we're going to be diving into everything leadership. I am going to say I'm not a leadership expert or a management consultant, but I have worked with a lot of different leaders. We're going to be interviewing these leaders. We're going to be talking about communication. We're going to be talking about boss holes. We're going to be talking about leading across generations, but also things like fuck up and fix it. We're going to talk about culture killers, and we are going to be dropping the occasional F-bomb on the podcast, which
maybe more than occasional.
You should be used to that from our last season.
Yeah.
But those are the things
we had
we're
a
going to
whole episode called the F word.
Yeah, exactly. And really busting those leadership myths. We want to talk about a conversation about what leadership is now, and break some of those stereotypes. So I'm really excited to do that. And I think that the guests we have are incredible. So I'm really looking forward to that and joining Lynette on this journey.
Yeah. And as Sheri mentioned, she's bringing the perspective of somebody who's worked with leadership, who aspired to leadership. And I talked a little bit about my background in executive leadership. So it's really important to us when we have the leadership conversation, to bring both perspectives to the table. And I think that makes our podcast somewhat unique. What you'll hear from us this season is we'll talk about things from the perspective of current and aspiring leaders, those being led and the ones leading teams, but also not necessarily just from that traditional perspective. So it'll be people who can demonstrate leadership, whether they have the title or the team or not.
Right.
Because that's really what it's about, right? Is like leadership in the broadest sense and not thinking about that narrow definition of leadership. But before we get into all those great topics, we need to, of course, kick off the season with a little bit of myth busting, as is our tradition.
Yes.
And so if you've been part of our community for a while, then you know that what we like to do is start off the conversation, the topic, with unlearning all the bullshit narratives that we've been given by society, systems, other people over the years. And we call this demythifying, which is essentially a little bit of an exorcism.
Right.
So let's get to it.
Yeah, for sure. And before we get started on myth busting, which is our favorite thing to do, we do want to define what leader and leadership is and what it isn't. So, leadership's not a title. It's not being a manager. You are not automatically a leader because you are a manager. I think a lot of people know that. And
even if you have a title, sometimes you're not a leader.
Exactly. Title does not make the leader, and leader does not make the title. So this is the broad leadership sense. And that's kind of how I want us to frame it. This is not just for CEO, C-suite level. This is sometimes about situational leadership. This is about the times where you showed up. This is about, where you want to go as a leader and you want to break those systems, or you work in people and culture and you want to create and support the evolution of the workplace. So leadership is everywhere, and we really want to highlight that and what it means. So let's get going on these myths so that we can get the season kicked off. Okay. Lynette.
Leadership number one.
Leadership number one. Leaders are born, not made.
Leaders are born, not made. Well, this is not the monarchy. People are not born into leadership. And also, they shouldn't be. I know I won't get into the monarchy, but
that's another podcast.
Yeah, that's a whole other podcast. No, leaders are not born. I can see how people think that so I'll talk about when I was a kid. So I'm the eldest of all of my cousins, of the whole family. And not to say that eldest children always naturally kind of lead, but I was one of those kids where when we were gathered in my grandparents' basement with all the cousins, I would be like, we're going to play store and I'm the manager, or we're going to play school and I'm the teacher. We're going to play house and I'm the mom. So, somebody could have the perspective that I naturally would organize people. I also would force them into these little Christmas plays that all of my cousins would star in, and it would be written, produced, and directed by Lynette Tremblay. I'm sorry to all of my cousins.
Hey, I did it too, and I was the youngest in my family. So.
Exactly. So somebody might think that someone who naturally organizes people or sort of just steps in and takes charge is a, quote, born leader.
Right.
You could also call that a born dictator.
Yes.
And that's the point, right? Just because you naturally assume those kinds of characteristics and roles doesn't mean that you are a good leader. I had to work really hard at becoming a good leader and figuring out what that looked like, what it looked like for me. how my values fit into that. And especially because in my career, I didn't have a lot of examples of good leaders to learn from. So to think that somebody is just naturally a leader or naturally a good leader. So maybe that's the part of the myth, right? It's not, maybe some people are sort of born quote unquote leaders, but they're not born good leaders. And this is about being a good leader.
And everyone finds their path, right?
Yeah.
And that may be different than other people's paths. And this whole stereotype that leaders are extroverts and they're the loudest one in the room and they're all of that. I mean, that's just not the case. And that hasn't been the case for a long time. And in my experience, I've learned from the quiet, the thinkers, the people that have really taught me great things, and the leadership qualities that I've tried to aspire to are actually not the ones you would think of.
Exactly.
So
this next leadership myth is a favorite of mine. There's no crying in baseball.
Right. So
maybe we should explain where that reference comes from for those who maybe those who aren't millennials.
So no crying in baseball, Tom Hanks, League of Their Own.
Watch the movie if you
Right.
haven't.
It's about a female baseball team in World War II. All the men were off in war. And of course, people needed entertainment and sports. So Tom Hanks, I mean, it's got an all-star roster. We've got Rosie O'Donnell. We've got Madonna. We've got so many amazing people. Gina Davis. So anyway, one of the girls starts crying and he's like, there's no crying in baseball. Like, this is something that, as a rough and tumble baseball coach, Tom Hanks, he's just never encountered this. And
she was crying because he was yelling at her.
He was yelling at her. Yeah, he made
too.
her cry.
Yeah.
So you made her cry, coach. Sorry. And that does happen in the professional workplaces. Yeah. There's an idea and a stereotype that leaders are stoic. Leaders do not cry. Leaders do not express emotion. They don't break down. And that's a bullshit myth because I think the greatest leaders are the ones who care. Leadership is about caring, and they show they care. And there's a difference between using your emotions for manipulation and using your emotions and not use them, expressing your emotions to show that you care or that you're passionate about a project. I know people that yell and scream to get their own way. That is seen sometimes as a version of power. That's not the case. Yelling at people is seen as strength when a man does it. But when a woman cries or somebody cries in the workplace, it's shown as weakness. People express emotions differently. But I find it interesting that we label certain emotions as strength and we label other emotions as weak. People are just expressing their emotions. So I think that if you care, if you are excited, we want leaders who are excited. We want leaders that are authentic. We want leaders that are vulnerable. They have to show emotion. So I think that's a bullshit myth. And I want to see more emotion. I want to see more feelings. I want to see more honesty from our leaders.
Although we will say that it's never okay to yell in the workplace. That's not like, it's one thing to express your emotion, but it's like, how do you express it in a healthy way?
Right.
I think the myth part is, there's this view that emotions don't belong in the workplace. Although people often don't think about anger as an emotion, but yeah, like that you shouldn't be weak or vulnerable or anything like that. And we think that's bullshit. That work should be human because we aren't a bunch of widgets and numbers. We're humans, and to not bring your human self to work is actually not good leadership. And you're not creating a space where other people can either. So if you're saying to people, come and talk to me about what's going on, well, if you don't ever show any kind of human emotion, why would they feel comfortable talking to you about theirs?
Yeah, and especially in creative industries, we want people to care about their work. So I've always seen this, and I've seen, show up, give it your all, give it your best. And then when, things are frustrating or people are getting frustrated, well, it's just work, don't care about it. And it's like, no, we want people to have that balance, but we want people to have feelings. And the best leaders I've had have been people that have expressed themselves and shown that they cared in times of stress, when we had to get something done. So that is a terrible bullshit myth.
Yep.
So next one we have open door policy.
Yeah. I think this was a good lead into open door policy because we talked about, I was talking about,
Right.
if you are not open, how do you expect somebody to come to you and be open? But so I think we've probably all heard some variation of this open door policy, and some people might be really surprised to hear us call this a leadership myth.
I love this. You were the first person to bring this up, and it was a total aha moment for me. So I'm excited for the audience to hear it.
I have a bit of a different perspective. So like when I hear people, and there's even in movies,
Right.
There was a movie I was watching the other day, and he started a new job, and he's like actually physically took the door off. He was like, I have an open door policy. And when I see people say that or see that in movies, I think about that Mean Girls clip where like the mom's like, I'm not a regular mom, I'm a cool mom. Like,
Yeah.
I'm not a regular boss, I'm an open door boss.
Yeah.
Well, so aside from the fact that I think it's goofy, I have two problems with the open door policy. I think the intent behind it is good. I just think it needs to be modernized. So on one hand, if you have this open door policy, you are relying on other people to walk through the door. You're basically saying, you have to come to me if you have a problem, or if something's wrong in your world, I'm going to just sit in my office. This is what I think of. I sit in my office and you're going to have to come to me and do that. So I think that leaders should be more proactive. And yes, you should be accessible, but you should also be out talking to people, being curious about what's going on with them, being observant, asking questions, and being part of their world. It also evokes this visual to me, and I think a lot of people aren't necessarily in office all the time anymore, but this visual of like the boss sitting in their office and all the other people out there in their offices or cubicles, and then being like, come to me with your problems. It's very sort of separating. The other issue I have with it, and this is something that I had to think about myself as a leader with my quote unquote open door policy, is that when somebody does come through your door, are you present? Are you creating an environment that they feel heard and that they have space for? Or if they're sitting there saying, can I talk to you about something? And you're like, yeah, and you're finishing an email, or you're distracted because something's on your phone, or you're looking off somewhere else.
Or the typing, and then when they come in, you're like, 1 second, you're not even looking at them. You just got like the finger up. Like, just please hold.
I thought about it and forced myself to, when people would come into my office, I would turn my monitor away, or like put my laptop down, turn my phone over. Like I would actually physically remove distractions so that I could be present for that conversation. Because it wasn't intentional. It wasn't like I was trying to be an asshole about it. But
No.
Yeah, you've got so many things going on in your world distracting you. And it's about being mindful and being present. So I just think simply having that open door policy is not enough.
No.
And I think it's a bit antiquated. So that's why I think it's kind of a leadership myth.
And that's a great one.
I think so.
Because how many times we hear that in the workplace?
I have an open door policy.
Yeah, come on over.
I don't know why I made that voice. Okay, so the next one I know is like definitely one for you. There's a specific style or values that make the best leader.
Right. And so when I started in my career, there was so much, what's your management style? What's your leadership style? And it was all about understanding your boss's style and how you navigated around that style. So they made the sandbox and they defined what was in it, and you just had to play in it. And over the years, I've realized that that's a myth and that's bullshit. And it's not just about your style. It's about the styles of your team and about how your style evolves and how you play with everybody else. So, I have a red leadership style. I did the quiz. And so that means that I'm very goal oriented. I'm extroverted. But I found myself managing a team of introverts. We had our analytical folks. We had our blue folks who were, very people oriented, always thought about people's feelings before making decisions, things like that. None of these things are weaknesses, but the style was completely different than mine. So you can have a specific style, but how are you making sure your team is set up for success? They are not going to suddenly become extroverts. They're not suddenly going to do and act how you do. So it was really important for me to understand how to work with them and support them. one example, how people like recognition, right? I don't mind recognition in meetings. I don't mind happy birthdays. I don't mind those things. But, if you get someone who is, I don't want to say shy, but more introverted, they don't like to receive recognition that way. They would like a handwritten note or a card or something like that. That's just one example of how you understand and how you show up for your team, understanding those differences. So I think a lot of these, and we're going to talk about this later on the podcast, but when people get their quote unquote definition of their style, it's almost like they want to put it as a badge on their blazer and just say, hey, this is who I am. Now you know. But
I've actually heard about people doing that in a workplace where they put it on their office.
Right.
Like, this is my style. And they were all encouraged to do it. On the one hand, that's good. So as long as it's for awareness, not for like, oh, don't come to me with analytics because I'm an ideas person. Or something.
Like you're setting an awareness and a personality, and you're not setting an expectation. And so for me, like, I learned that sometimes when I work with analytical folks, I get a little bit frazzled. I have to work on myself. I have to work on how I work with the team and how I understand their styles so that I can give them work better. I can relate to them better. I can give them feedback better. I can recognize them better. So that to me is where style comes in. But the misconception is that style is definition and everybody has to play within your style or your color or your ET and J or whatever that might be. So
or that there's a specific style that makes a good leader.
Exactly.
It kind of goes back to our natural born leader thing of there's no specific style that is the perfect leader of like, oh, if you come out, if the thing spits out this style for you, you will be a good leader. It's adapting to everybody else's style. Same thing with values. Like one of the myths I had in my mind years ago was that a good leader had certain kinds of values.
Right.
And so I like wrote them out. I think we talked about this on season 1, but I wrote them out and I was like, okay, I should aspire to these values. But the myth was that, no, it should be about your values. What are your core values? And then how do you use those as your barometer for decision making? It's not about every leader has to have the same cookie cutter values. So there's no sort of cutout of a leader that you can just like put your face into like at the fair or whatever.
Yeah. And that's why we talk a lot too about like making sure you understand your values and how you fit, as opposed to like pushing your values on other people or not understanding other people's values or going to organizations that don't share your values. Like there's so much when it comes to values and culture as well that need to be considered, especially when it comes to leadership. But yeah, that is essential. Like I think styles are just there so that we can better understand each other and better work together, not so that you can define the people that work with you or work for you. So
yeah,
mithy.
I think this last one might be your favorite.
Oh my, I love this story. So we've all heard of the tall poppy syndrome and also Icarus syndrome. So Lynette, can you explain a little bit about this and also sort of how you've dealt with that as a young leader, as a leader in general, as a female leader, as a, rabble rouser and a rebel that you are? How did you deal with tall poppy syndrome? First of all, what is it? But how did you deal with it?
This is gonna ramp up now. So if you're not familiar with tall poppy syndrome, it is basically the concept that if you kind of rise up to leadership, your head kind of goes above the rest of the crowd and it can get chopped off, or that it will get chopped off. That's kind of the perspective. I actually it was kind of sad. I was talking to this one female professional and she's like, I don't want to be a tall poppy. And that made me really sad because it's fine for people not to want to aspire to a certain title. That's not for everybody. But it was purely because she was afraid of getting her head chopped off because she's seen other leaders have their heads roll and everything else. And, like I've had my head chopped off before too. So maybe there is something to this whole tall poppy thing. But the Icarus thing is like it's similar. And it's probably not prevalent, but it's something that was said to me. And it was when I got a certain promotion. somebody called me Icarus. And so if you're not familiar with Icarus, we're storytelling here. It's Greek mythology. Icarus's father was an inventor and invented a set of wings for him to fly away. They were made of wax and feathers. And he was warned by his father not to fly too close to the sun out of hubris, because the sun would melt his wings and he would fall to the ocean and plunge to his death. It's pretty gruesome. So I guess in this person's mind, by me getting a promotion too soon, too fast, I might be a little too big for my britches and die.
Gonna fall in the ocean and
die apparently. But some variation of this, I think many of us have been told, like you've been told you're too young to be a director. And lots of us have been said, oh, you're climbing too high, too fast, or you're not ready, or some kind of variation of that. So I think we're combining Icarus and Tall Poppy, but it's some semblance of prioritizing experience or age that you have to have put in a certain amount of time. And I have to say, like, just because you've put in 20 years doesn't make you a good leader. I've seen some really crap leaders who have lots of quote unquote experience being shit leaders. And I've seen some of the best leaders are some brand new ones. So I don't think experience or age has anything to do with it. And I don't believe in this metric or this formula of, who says I'm climbing too high, too fast. I think you climb as high as you're capable of and as fast as your ambition will take you.
Yeah.
And what's wrong with that? And just because you're doing it doesn't necessarily mean your head gets chopped off. But also, we talked about the system. If the system wasn't built for you and it doesn't reward your style of leadership, you might get your head chopped off. But that doesn't mean that you're not a good leader and that there's not a space for you. Maybe it means you have to find one that fits you or create your own space. And that's something that I'm working on right now. So I looked at this Icarus thing and I thought about it. I actually even wrote a poem about it. So if you follow me on Medium, you can find it there. But I was like, you know what? I don't think I'm Icarus. Maybe I'm the sun instead. So maybe you shouldn't fly too close to me because I'll melt your wings off. That got really violent.
You totally made lemonade with that one, for sure. The sun's a star and you're a star. And if you have ambition and you go and you don't get anyone to support that where you are, you will find it somewhere else. So, that manager who told me I was too young to be a director, the people who called me 3 weeks later didn't think I was too young.
Yep.
So there's always going to be a place for you. There's always going to be a space. So, you are the sun.
And just because you're uncomfortable with my growth doesn't mean I didn't earn it.
Exactly.
So if you're struggling with any of these leadership myths or you're scared of being a tall poppy, I think that's the point, is acknowledging that there's legitimate fear out there, but it doesn't mean that you shouldn't follow your path. No. And it's all part of it. And that's why we're creating this community, so that we can bring together people who are like-minded to support each other, to learn from each other, and to call out this kind of bullshit.
Yep.
We've said bullshit a lot this episode.
Yes. Bullshit.
It's like our new favorite word, apparently.
Call out the gatekeepers.
Yeah. Yes.
Break the door
Who
open.
are these people?
Well, that's a wrap on episode 1 of season 2. I'm really excited about this. This is going to be great. So we hope you'll stick around for the rest of the season. And we're pretty excited for the content and topics we're going to be releasing for this season 2. So make sure you follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn for now, because we'll post more content there, and we will be starting a YouTube channel soon. I'm really excited about that. You can also see our videos and our content on our social channels as well.
And we love when our listeners engage with us. So please do reach out, post things, share things with us on social media. Share with us your stories. We're going to be sharing a lot of our stories as the season goes on, but we would love to use your examples, resources you've found helpful, because that's what we're all about, is learning from each other. And if you have ideas as well for topics that you want us to talk about, or episodes, we do take that. Last season, we created a 2-part episode because somebody brought a really great idea to us. So please do get in touch with us. And stay tuned for the next episode, which is going to be extra spicy. And until then, stay spicy.
Stay spicy.